Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to Midnight Affairs Tales. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world you are watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The rain had been falling for hours, a cold, relentless drizzle tapping against the kitchen window of the Carter home. Jack Carter stood in the dim light, staring into his coffee cup like it was some kind of battlefield map. He wasn't a man who allowed his mind to wander. Years in the military had trained him to be present, precise. But today, something felt off. The house was too quiet. Lily hadn't come down for breakfast yet, and Emma had been pacing the living room since dawn. Jack's leave from service was supposed to be a break, 2 weeks of normal life before redeployment, but peace never seemed to last long for him. Then the phone rang. It wasn't the kind of ring you ignore. The tone cut through the air like a rifle shot, freezing Emma mid-step. Jack reached for it, his instincts firing up before he even touched the receiver. Jack Carter, a woman's voice, trembling, asked, "Yes. Who's this?" "This is Grace Miller. I'm the school nurse. You need to come to the high school right away." "It's Lily. She's..." Emma's eyes widened, her hand covering her mouth. "She's what?" Jack's voice dropped to that low, controlled tone he used in hostile situations. "She's been hurt badly. She's unconscious." The room spun for a split second. Jack didn't remember dropping the coffee mug, but the sound of it shattering seemed to echo through the kitchen. He didn't wait for details. Didn't hang up properly. Didn't think. He was already grabbing his keys, barking at Emma to get her coat, his heart pounding in a rhythm that reminded him of gunfire. They drove through the rain in silence, but silence didn't mean peace. Emma's breath was shallow, her fingers gripping the dashboard so tight her knuckles turned white. Jack's eyes stayed on the road, but his mind was already cycling through possibilities. Accident, fall, maybe some stupid teenage fight. He wanted it to be anything except what his gut told him it was. When they pulled into the school parking lot, a police cruiser was already there. Jack's pulse spiked. He parked at an angle, ignoring the lines, and got out before the car had even fully stopped. Inside, the hallway smelled of bleach and wet clothes. Students were huddled together in whispering clusters, their eyes darting toward Jack like he was some sort of dangerous animal that had just wandered into their world. Grace Miller, the nurse, was waiting by the office. Her face was pale, her eyes glassy. "She's in the nurse's room," Grace said, her voice breaking. "Jack, it wasn't an accident." The door was slightly ajar. Jack stepped inside, and the sight nearly took his legs out from under him. Lily lay on the small cot, her face swollen, a deep gash above her eyebrow stitched in a hurry. There was dried blood in her hair, and bruises were already darkening around her cheek and jaw. Emma dropped to her knees beside her, tears spilling freely. Jack didn't cry. He didn't breathe. He just stared. Who did this? His voice was so quiet Grace had to lean in to hear him. She swallowed hard. It was some of the boys from her class. Ethan Reed, Jake Miller, and, she hesitated, glancing toward the doorway as if someone might overhear, Mark Collins. Jack didn't know the first two, but the last name hit differently. Mark was older, 18, maybe 19, and had a reputation for trouble. But Jack had heard whispers about his father, about the people he knew in town. Grace's voice trembled. They cornered her in the locker room after practice. The security cameras were conveniently not working. Jack's jaw tightened. And where are they now? In class. The principal says the police are handling it. She spat the last words out like they were poison. Jack walked out without another word, his boots striking the linoleum like gunshots. He found Principal David Harris in his office, leaning back in his chair, talking low to Officer Ryan Brooks. They both stopped talking when Jack entered. "Mr. Carter," Harris began, his voice rehearsed. "Your daughter is going to be okay. Save it." Jack cut in, stepping closer. "I want to know why the hell the kids who put my daughter in that bed are still walking free in your school." Ryan Brooks leaned forward, his badge catching the light. "We're conducting an investigation. You need to let the process work." Jack's eyes locked onto his. "I've seen your kind of process before." Ryan's jaw tightened. but he said nothing. Harris raised his hands in a calming gesture. Let's not escalate. Jack's voice turned cold. It escalated when they put their hands on my kid. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Jack turned and left, Emma calling after him. But he wasn't listening anymore. Back in the car, Emma tried to talk him down. Jack, please, just let the police. Emma, he said, eyes fixed on the windshield. You know better than that. Her voice cracked. If you do something stupid, we could lose you too. He didn't answer. Not because he didn't hear her, but because the answer was already forming in his mind, and it wasn't something she'd want to hear. That night, Jack sat alone in the dark living room, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the floor. His military duffel bag sat open at his feet, half packed with clothes, half filled with tools of a different kind, things he hadn't touched since his last deployment. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, but it wasn't for comfort. It was ritual. His hands moved methodically, like he was cleaning a weapon in the barracks. Lily's bruised face wouldn't leave his mind. Neither would the names Grace had given him. He thought about the years he'd spent following orders, waiting for someone else to tell him when to act. But this was different. This was personal. By midnight, the plan had started to form. Not all of it, just enough to know where to start. Ethan Reed, the first name on the list. Jack picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. Tom Walker, the voice on the other end answered. It's Jack. I need a favor. A pause. You sound like you're about to do something that can't be undone. Jack's voice was steady. I am. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Jack sat in his truck outside a small, run-down house on the edge of town. He knew Ethan's parents worked early shifts. The boy would be alone. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy, thick with the smell of wet asphalt. Jack's fingers tapped against the steering wheel in time with his heartbeat. He wasn't here to talk. He wasn't here to scare anyone. He was here to make sure the first name on his list never laid a hand on anyone again. And as he stepped out of the truck, slipping on his leather gloves, he caught the faintest movement in the upstairs window. Ethan Reed was awake, watching him, enjoying the story so far. Don't forget to subscribe. It keeps the stories going and means a lot. Something surprising is just around the corner. Share this with friends so they don't miss out either. Thanks for being here. Let's continue the story. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long streaks of pale orange light across the cracked sidewalk as Jack Carter approached the front door of Ethan Reed's house. The neighborhood was still asleep, except for a distant dog barking somewhere in the next street over. The kind of stillness that made every sound sharper, every movement more noticeable. Jack's boots were silent on the wet concrete. Years of military training had taught him how to move without drawing attention, how to blend into his surroundings until he became part of them. But there was no one here to hide from, not yet. He glanced up at the window where he'd seen Ethan's shadow a few minutes earlier. The curtain moved again. Jack could almost feel the boy's unease from here. That was good. Fear was the first crack in someone's armor. He knocked on the door, 3 firm taps that echoed through the empty street. No answer. He waited, then knocked again, slower this time, deliberate. Footsteps. Light ones. Hesitant. The door creaked open just an inch, and a pale teenage face peeked through. Ethan Reed. His hair was messy, eyes red, whether from sleep or guilt, Jack couldn't tell. What do you want? The boy mumbled. Jack didn't smile. We need to talk. Ethan started to close the door, but Jack's gloved hand shot forward, catching it. Don't make me force my way in. Something in Jack's tone, quiet, calm, but with an edge that could cut steel, froze the boy in place. Inside, the house smelled faintly of stale cereal and laundry detergent. Jack closed the door behind him, the click of the lock unnaturally loud in the silence. Ethan backed up toward the kitchen, glancing around like he was hoping someone might appear to save him. No one did. Jack's eyes never left him. You know who I am. Ethan swallowed. You're Lily's dad. Jack took a slow step forward. That's right. And you know why I'm here. Ethan's face twitched. I didn't. Jack cut him off with a raised hand. Don't waste your breath lying to me. You put your hands on my daughter. You thought you could walk away from it. You thought the badge and the school would protect you. I didn't mean. Jack's voice dropped lower, dangerous. You meant every second of it. The boy's breathing quickened. He glanced toward the back door. Jack saw it instantly, the fight or flight flicker in the eyes. You take one step toward that door, Ethan, and I promise you it'll be the last thing you ever do. Ethan froze. Jack moved closer until they were only a few feet apart. I've been in war zones, son. I've seen what happens to people who think they can hide behind power. And I'm telling you right now, you're not walking away untouched. Ethan's voice cracked. You can't. Jack grabbed him by the collar, pulling him close. I can. And I will. The boy's legs buckled, but Jack held him up, staring straight into his eyes. You tell me everything. Every detail. Who planned it? Who watched? Who laughed? Ethan shook his head. Mark. Mark told us to. He said she deserved it. Jack's grip tightened. Why? The boy's lips trembled. She embarrassed him. In front of the whole team. Said he was a coward. He said he'd make her pay. Jack let go, letting Ethan stumble back into the counter. The boy was trembling now, his bravado stripped away. Here's what's going to happen, Jack said, stepping toward the door. You're going to go to school today. You're going to act like nothing happened. And you're going to keep your mouth shut about me being here. Because if I hear you've spoken to anyone, your friends, the cops, your precious principal. He leaned in so close Ethan could smell the faint trace of whiskey on his breath. I'll come back. And I won't be in a talking mood. Ethan nodded rapidly, too scared to speak. Jack opened the door and stepped out into the cool morning air, feeling that familiar surge of adrenaline he hadn't felt since combat. The schoolyard was buzzing by the time Jack arrived an hour later. He parked a block away and walked in on foot, blending into the crowd of parents and students. His eyes scanned the open space, the basketball court, the benches, the cluster of lockers near the gym. That's when he saw him. Mark Collins. Tall, broad-shouldered, and surrounded by a small group of friends. Mark stood in the middle of the playground like he owned it. His laugh was loud, fake, the kind of sound that told Jack this was a boy who thrived on other people's fear. Jack didn't approach. Not yet. He needed to watch, to learn. The military had drilled it into him. Never go into a fight without knowing your target. Mark's eyes landed briefly on Lily's empty seat at the far bench. Something in his smirk told Jack that this wasn't just an act of teenage cruelty. This was personal for Mark, too. Jack slipped into the shadows near the gym building, leaning against the wall where he could see without being seen. That's when a familiar voice came from behind him. You planning to do something stupid, Carter? Jack turned. Tom Walker, his old army buddy, looking older but no less sharp, with that half smile that said he knew exactly what Jack was thinking. You said you wanted a favor, Tom continued. I'm here. But I'm telling you now, if you're going after these kids, it's not just about them. Someone's protecting them. Someone higher up. Jack's jaw tightened. Then I'll take them all. Tom shook his head. You'll need more than a gun and a temper for that. He glanced toward the principal's office. Start with him. Harris isn't as clean as he looks. The bell rang, and the playground emptied as the students filed inside. Mark was the last to go, tossing his backpack over his shoulder, laughing at something Ryan Brooks. Yes, the same corrupt cop, said as he passed by the gates. Jack watched them both, his mind already connecting the dots. Ryan Brooks wasn't just involved. He was part of the reason these boys thought they were untouchable. Jack stepped away from the wall, the first threads of his larger plan forming. Ethan was just the start. Mark was next. And Ryan? Ryan would get his own special chapter. But before Jack could make his next move, a sudden scream echoed from the far side of the school. Students came running, panic in their eyes. Tom glanced at Jack. Looks like you're not the only one starting a war. Jack's pace quickened as he rounded the corner, only to freeze at what he saw. Lily's name, spray painted across the wall in bright red. Underneath, in jagged letters, she deserved it. The spray-painted words bled into the brick like an open wound, raw and unflinching. She deserved it. The letters were crude, hurried, but there was something deliberate in the size and placement, big enough for the entire student body to see, positioned directly where the morning sun hit the wall. Jack Carter stood in the center of the commotion, his breath slow but heavy, like the rumble before an artillery strike. Around him, students whispered, some laughing nervously, others glancing at him with that wide-eyed fear reserved for soldiers who have seen too much. Emma's voice echoed in his head. If you do something stupid, we could lose you too. But this wasn't about stupidity. This was about resolve. Tom Walker moved in beside him, eyes scanning the crowd. This was done last night, he murmured. Paint's dry. Jack's gaze fixed on the red letters. Mark Collins. Tom shook his head slightly. Could be, but he's not sloppy. This feels like a distraction. Jack looked toward the main doors where Principal David Harris stood with Officer Ryan Brooks, both speaking in hushed tones. Brooks kept glancing at Jack, his smirk more pronounced with each stolen look. The message wasn't just for the students, it was for him. The students were herded back into class, leaving only a maintenance worker scrubbing at the wall with a rag that barely dulled the paint. Jack lingered. Don't, Tom warned. Not here. Not now. But Jack was already moving toward the principal's office. The office smelled faintly of coffee and something sweet, maybe donuts. Harris sat behind his desk, flipping through a file, while Brooks leaned casually against the wall. Jack didn't wait to be invited in. I want to know what you're going to do about that wall. Harris gave him a practiced frown. We're investigating. Investigating. Jack stepped closer. I've seen more action from a dead radio. Brooks straightened. Careful, Carter. Threatening school officials isn't going to help your daughter. Jack's eyes snapped to him. And what are you doing to help her? Besides covering for the little cowards who put her in the hospital. Brooks's smile thinned. You think you're still in a war zone, but here? We have rules. You break them, you pay. Jack leaned in, close enough that Brooks could see the faint scar under his left eye. I've paid before. I can pay again. But I promise you, before I do, I'll collect every single debt owed to me. Harris cleared his throat nervously. This isn't productive. Jack slammed both hands onto the desk, the sound sharp and final. You're right. Talking to you too is a waste of time. He turned to leave, but as he reached the door, Brooks called out. You take one wrong step, Carter, and you'll wish you stayed overseas. Jack didn't turn back. I took plenty of wrong steps overseas. None of them scared me. Outside, Tom was waiting, leaning against the wall with a knowing look. You just painted a target on your back. Jack kept walking. Good. Easier for me to find them when they come for me. Tom matched his pace. What's the play? Jack's voice was quiet, precise. First, I stripped them of their safety nets. Brooks, Harris, anyone shielding those kids, I take them down. One by one. No warning. Tom gave a low whistle. And here I thought you called me for a beer. That night, Jack sat at the kitchen table with an old, battered notebook open in front of him. The pages were blank, but not for long. He wrote 3 names in block letters. Mark Collins, Ethan Reed, Jake Miller. Then, underneath, in a separate column, Ryan Brooks, David Harris. He stared at the list, his pen hovering. This wasn't going to be some blind rush. It was going to be methodical, military, controlled chaos. Emma came into the kitchen, her eyes tired. You didn't eat dinner. I'm not hungry. She sat across from him, her gaze falling on the notebook. Jack, don't do this. Not like this. He met her eyes, and for a moment, the soldier faded, replaced by the father. Emma, I can't let this go. If I do, they'll think they can hurt her or anyone else, without consequences. Her hand covered his. And what happens to you? Jack didn't answer. Because deep down, he knew, once this started, there would be no going back. 2 days later, the first strike came. Not with violence, yet, but with precision. Jack knew Brooks's schedule. He knew which diner he stopped at every morning before work, what time he left, and the exact route he took to the station. Jack parked 2 blocks away, waited until Brooks's cruiser appeared, and followed at a distance. Not close enough to be obvious, just enough to be a shadow. When Brooks pulled into the station, Jack slipped into the alley behind it, cutting through to the side entrance where the staff lockers were. It wasn't hard to get in, Brooks had left the door propped open, a rookie mistake. Inside, Jack found Brooks's locker. No lock. No caution. The arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. Jack slipped a small flash drive into the uniform pocket hanging there. Not with evidence, yet, but with tracking software Tom had given him. From now on, every text, every email, every search Brooks made would be Jack's to see. That evening, Jack sat in his truck watching the feed on his laptop. Brooks was sloppy. Too sloppy. Within hours, Jack saw a string of messages between Brooks and Harris about making sure the Collins kid is cleared. Worse, there were photos. Grainy, late-night shots of Brooks meeting with a man Jack didn't recognize, passing him what looked like a stack of cash. Jack took a screenshot, saving it in a folder labeled ammo. The next day, Jack returned to the school, not as a parent, but as a shadow. He watched from the far end of the playground as Jake Miller strutted toward a group of friends, tossing a basketball between his hands like nothing had happened. Jack's eyes narrowed. Jake didn't have Brooks's protection. Not directly. That meant he was vulnerable. Tom's voice came through the earpiece. "You sure about this? Kid's just a pawn." Jack's reply was ice. So was Lily. When the final bell rang, Jake walked home alone, headphones in, oblivious. Jack followed at a distance, blending into the flow of pedestrians until they reached a side street with no cameras. That's when Jack made his move. Fast, silent, pulling Jake into the narrow alley before the boy could even scream. He slammed him against the wall, one hand over his mouth. "You're going to tell me everything, Jake. And if you lie..." Jake's eyes were wide with terror. "I didn't want to. It was all Mark. He made us." "Names," Jack growled. "Mark, Ethan, and..." Jake hesitated, trembling. There was someone else. Someone older. Not a student. Big guy. Tattoo on his neck. "I don't know his name." Jack released him, shoving him away. "You see me again, you walk the other way." Jake didn't need to be told twice. He bolted. Jack leaned against the alley wall, piecing it together. An outsider. Connected to Mark. Probably tied to whatever Brooks and Harris were covering up. This wasn't just about a schoolyard beating anymore. This was bigger, dirtier. And Jack had just found the loose thread. The next night, Jack sat in his truck outside a rundown bar on the edge of town. Tom had given him the address. Inside, according to the bartender, was a man with a neck tattoo who'd been seen with Mark Collins more than once. Jack's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He could almost feel the moment shifting, the line between justice and vengeance blurring until they were the same thing. He stepped out of the truck, the cold night air biting at his skin. The door to the bar creaked open, and a tall figure stepped out, cigarette glowing in the dark. A tattoo snaked up the man's neck. Jack started walking toward him. The man with the neck tattoo flicked his cigarette into the gutter, the ember hissing as it hit a puddle. He didn't see Jack at first, not until the ex-soldier was within 10 feet, his boots steady on the cracked pavement. The man's eyes narrowed, sizing him up. "You lost, old man." Jack didn't answer. His silence carried more weight than any words could. The man shifted, one hand disappearing into the pocket of his worn leather jacket. Jack's stance shifted too. Not obvious, but ready. Always ready. "I'm looking for Mark Collins," Jack said finally, his voice calm, almost conversational. "You know him?" The man smirked. "What's it to you?" Jack took another step forward, close enough now to see the tattoo clearly. A coiled serpent, its fangs bared. "You were with him after the attack on my daughter." The smirk faltered. "Your daughter?" Jack's eyes didn't blink. Lily Carter. Recognition flashed, followed quickly by that defensive arrogance men like him wore like armor. "Look, I don't know what you think you know, but..." Jack's fist was a blur. It connected with the man's jaw, snapping his head back against the wall with a dull thud. He staggered, cursing, but before he could recover, Jack had him pinned by the throat, forearm pressing hard enough to cut off his air. "You're going to tell me everything," Jack said, voice still steady, still calm, like the calm before a detonation. "Or you're going to wake up in a ditch with no memory of how you got there." The man clawed at Jack's arm, but the strength behind it was unyielding. You're insane." No, Jack said, tightening his grip. I'm a father. The man's eyes darted, searching for help, but the street was empty. The bar's door stayed closed. Mark, Jack prompted. What did he pay you for? The man wheezed, struggling. Not money. Protection. Said his dad had friends. Big friends. Told me to keep an eye on her. Make sure she didn't talk. Jack's jaw clenched. And the night she was attacked? The man swallowed hard. I was just backup. If she ran, I'd stop her. Jack's eyes darkened. You ever touch her? The man shook his head quickly. No. No, I swear. Jack released him just enough for air to pass through his throat. Who else? Jack demanded. The man hesitated. Jack slammed him back into the wall again. Names. Brooks, he blurted. The cop. He's in deep with them. Keeps the heat off. And Harris, the principal. He's on their payroll too. Mark's dad runs it all from the shadows. Jack's mind locked onto the new piece. Mark's dad. The man nodded frantically. Name's Richard Collins. Owns half the property in this town. If something bad happens, it's because he let it. Jack let go, and the man crumpled against the wall, coughing. You see me again, Jack said, his tone low and final. You walk the other way. Because next time, I won't be talking. The man didn't wait to be told twice. He bolted into the darkness. Jack returned to his truck, his pulse steady, but his thoughts sharper than ever. He'd come looking for a hired thug. Instead, he'd found the real target, Richard Collins. But there was still an order to things. And Ethan Reed's name was still at the top of the list. It was just after midnight when Jack parked outside Ethan's house again. This time, he didn't knock. He moved through the shadows to the side of the property, found the basement window he'd spotted earlier, and slid it open. Inside, the faint glow of a gaming console lit Ethan's face. Headphones on, he was too focused on the screen to notice the silent figure moving toward him. Jack's shadow fell across the boy's back, and Ethan froze mid-game. He turned slowly, eyes wide. What the hell? Jack's hand shot out, grabbing the headphones and yanking them off. You've got one chance to make this easier on yourself. Ethan stammered. I told you, it was Mark, and you still went along with it. Jack cut in. The boy's breathing quickened. You can't. Jack took a step closer, his presence filling the small basement room. You think the cops will protect you? Brooks? He's already drowning, and when he goes down, you go with him. Ethan's voice broke. What do you want? Jack's reply was cold. An apology. The boy blinked. What? To her, Jack said. In person. Tomorrow. Ethan hesitated. If I do that, will you leave me alone? Jack leaned in until his face was inches from Ethan's. If you do that, you might live long enough to graduate. The next morning, Ethan shuffled into the hospital room where Lily lay sleeping. Jack stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching. Ethan mumbled something about being sorry, his voice barely audible. Lily didn't stir. Jack stepped forward, his shadow falling over the boy. Louder. Ethan's voice cracked as he repeated it. Jack didn't care about the sincerity. It was about making him feel the weight of it. When Ethan left, Jack followed him to the parking lot. Stay away from her, he said. Forever. Ethan nodded rapidly and didn't look back. Later that day, Jack sat in Tom's truck, parked across from the Collins estate. The place was massive. Iron gates, security cameras, the kind of property that spoke of power and untouchable wealth. Tom glanced at him. You planning to walk right in there? Jack's eyes stayed on the gate. Not yet. First, I make them bleed where they can't hide it. How? Jack's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. By taking apart everything they think makes them safe. That night, Jack broke into the principal's office. It wasn't difficult. He'd watched the building long enough to know the routines. In Harris's locked filing cabinet, Jack found exactly what he was looking for: financial statements, cash deposits far beyond a school administrator's salary, and records of maintenance expenses that lined up perfectly with the dates of every camera failure on school property. Jack photographed everything. Each click of his phone camera another nail in Harris's coffin. Then, at the bottom of the drawer, he found something else: photos. Grainy shots of Lily in the school hallway, taken without her knowledge. Jack's hands clenched around the edges of the paper. This wasn't just bullying. This was surveillance. Someone had been watching her for weeks. By the time he left the school, Jack knew two things for certain. Richard Collins was running a network, and his daughter had been a target long before the beating. He didn't know why yet, but he would. And when he did, they would regret ever learning her name. The Collins estate loomed in the dark like a sleeping predator, silent but dangerous, its sprawling lawns glistening under the pale light of the moon. Jack Carter sat in his truck across the road, the hum of the engine low and steady. His eyes never left the iron gates. It had been 2 days since he'd uncovered the photographs in Principal Harris's filing cabinet. 2 days of piecing together fragments of a puzzle that kept getting darker the closer he looked. On the passenger seat, the photos lay spread out beside the financial statements. Harris's payments matched deposits into an account registered to a shell company, one that, after a little digging, traced directly back to Richard Collins. Jack didn't need more proof to know what he was dealing with. He'd seen this kind of operation before. Only in war zones, the names were different, and the people pulling strings were uniforms instead of tailored suits. The difference here? This was his home, his daughter, his fight. Tom Walker's voice crackled over the small comm unit they'd been using to coordinate. He was parked a street away, his vantage point giving him a clear line on the rear of the estate. Security rotations tight, Tom said. 2 guards on foot, one doing slow laps in a golf cart. Cameras cover every blind spot. You'd think this was a government compound. Jack didn't take his eyes off the gate. That's because it is. Just without the flag. Tom gave a low chuckle. You're not thinking of hitting it tonight, are you? Not tonight, Jack said. First, I make them step outside. The next morning, Jack put on his old army jacket and drove into town, parking 2 blocks from the police station. He knew Ryan Brooks's routine well enough now to predict his movements down to the minute. At 8:15 sharp, Brooks emerged from the diner with a coffee in one hand and a pastry in the other. Jack waited until he'd taken 3 steps toward his cruiser before crossing the street. Brooks's eyes landed on him immediately. Carter, you stalking me now? Jack stopped just short of him, voice low. I know about the money, Brooks. The meetings. The photos of my daughter. The smirk faltered for the briefest moment. You're digging in places you shouldn't. Jack stepped closer. You've got 2 choices. You walk away from Collins, or I drag you down with him. And trust me, you won't like how far I'm willing to go. Brooks's jaw tightened. You think you're the first guy to try and scare me? Jack's eyes didn't blink. No, but I'll be the last. By noon, word was spreading through town, quietly, carefully, that Jack Carter was asking questions. It wasn't a rumor by accident. Jack wanted it that way. The kind of people Richard Collins surrounded himself with thrived on control. If they thought it was slipping, they'd make mistakes. And Jack needed those mistakes. That night, Jack and Tom met in the back of a hardware store owned by one of Tom's old friends. They spread out maps of the school, the police station, and the Collins estate on the counter. We've got 3 pressure points, Tom said, tapping each map in turn. Harris controls the school. Brooks controls the cops. Richard controls them both. You hit one, the others tighten up. You hit all 3 at once, they break, Jack finished. Tom leaned back. You've got the patience for that. Jack looked him in the eye. For this? I've got all the patience in the world. 2 days later, the first crack appeared. Tom's surveillance caught Brooks in an unmarked sedan, meeting with a man neither of them recognized. Through the zoom lens, they watched as Brooks handed over a sealed envelope. The man counted through it, cash, no doubt, before sliding it into his jacket and walking away. Jack followed the man for the next hour, careful to keep his distance. The trail led to an abandoned warehouse near the river. Through the cracked windows, Jack saw more than just one man. There were 4, all armed, all wearing the kind of street clothes that said they didn't care about blending in. And on the table in the center of the room was something Jack didn't expect: files. He recognized the cover immediately. School records. Lily's school records. Jack pulled back, adrenaline tightening every muscle. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was planning. Coordinated. He called Tom. They've got her file. Tom swore under his breath. Why? The beating's already done. Jack's voice was cold. Because they're not finished. The next morning, Jack drove Lily to a friend's house 2 towns over, leaving her under the watch of Emma's cousin. Emma didn't argue. She'd seen the change in Jack's eyes, the way he scanned every street corner, every shadow. When he returned home, the war board in his garage had grown. Strings connected names, places, dates. The centerpiece was no longer Mark Collins. It was Richard. Beneath it, in bold marker, Jack had written 2 words, Endgame. The days that followed were quiet. Almost too quiet. Brooks stopped showing up at the diner. Harris kept his office door locked. Mark Collins didn't set foot on school property. It was the kind of stillness that would make a normal man think the storm had passed. But Jack wasn't a normal man. He knew storms. He knew the way the air changed before the first strike of lightning. And he could feel it now. Late one night, Tom called. His voice was urgent. They've moved something big into the warehouse. I can't see what, but there's more traffic than usual. And Jack, Brooks is there. Jack was already moving, keys in hand. I'm on my way. They parked 2 blocks from the warehouse and moved on foot, sticking to the shadows. The air smelled faintly of oil and rain. Through the broken window, Jack finally saw it. Rows of crates, each stamped with the Collins Shipping Company logo. Men moved in and out, carrying them like they were heavy. What's in them? Tom whispered. Jack's eyes narrowed. Let's find out. They waited until the guards rotated, then slipped through the side entrance. Inside, the hum of a generator filled the air. Jack pried open the nearest crate, the nails screeching as they came loose. Inside were stacks of sealed envelopes. He tore one open and froze. Cash. Stacks of it. Enough to buy silence. Enough to own this entire town. Tom's hand landed on his shoulder. Jack. Jack turned. At the far end of the warehouse, Brooks was standing with Richard Collins himself. Richard's voice carried just enough for Jack to hear. The Carter problem ends this week. Jack's grip tightened around the crowbar in his hand. The quiet was over. The warehouse scene played over in Jack Carter's mind like a war film stuck on repeat. Richard Collins's voice, calm, confident, unshaken, wasn't the kind of threat you shrugged off. The Carter problem ends this week. Jack wasn't a man to underestimate danger. He'd lived too long in places where the wrong step cost lives. And he knew one thing. When men like Richard spoke in absolutes, they already had a plan in motion. The next morning, Jack was back on school grounds, not because he wanted to be, but because he needed to be. If Collins was moving against him, Lily's school was a likely staging ground. It was early, too early for students, and the halls had that echoing emptiness Jack remembered from his own childhood. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. He moved with deliberate steps, scanning corners, checking doors. Years in combat zones had trained him to read spaces, to feel when something wasn't right. And something here wasn't right. He reached the hallway near the gym, where Lily had been attacked. The locker room door was closed, but a faint sound came from inside, a metallic clink, like a lock being adjusted. Jack approached slowly, the sound of his boots muted against the worn tile. He eased the door open just enough to see. Inside, Ryan Brooks was crouched by the lockers, his back to the door. He wasn't in uniform, just a dark hoodie and jeans, but Jack knew that silhouette. Brooks slipped something small into one of the lockers and shut it quietly. He turned and froze when he saw Jack. "What are you doing here?" Brooks asked, too quickly. Jack stepped into the room, letting the doors swing shut behind him. "I could ask you the same thing." Brooks's jaw tightened. "This is police business." Jack's gaze dropped to the locker Brooks had just closed. "Funny. Doesn't look official." Brooks moved to block him, but Jack sidestepped, spinning the lock until it clicked. Inside, on the top shelf, sat a small, nondescript envelope. He opened it. Photographs. Not just of Lily, of other girls, too. All students. Some candid shots in the hallways, some outside the school, some at the local park. Jack's grip on the envelope tightened. "You're dead." Brooks stepped back, his hands raising slightly. "You don't get it, Carter. I'm not the one you should be looking at." Jack's voice was low, dangerous. You've got 10 seconds to convince me not to break you right here. Brooks's breathing quickened. It's Collins. He's been building something for years. Control over the town, over the cops, over the school. Harris runs the recruitment. I just make sure nothing sticks. Jack's eyes narrowed. Recruitment for what? Brooks shook his head. You don't want to know. Jack slammed him against the lockers. Wrong answer. Brooks winced. It's not just about the money. Collins is grooming certain kids, making them dependent. Some end up working for him. The others, they disappear. Jack's stomach tightened, but his face stayed stone. And my daughter? Brooks hesitated. She said something to Mark that night. About what he was doing to another girl. Collins wanted her scared quiet. It went too far. Jack stepped back slowly, the implications cutting deep. This wasn't just vengeance anymore. It was dismantling a predator's network. You're going to help me, Jack said. Brooks shook his head. If I talk, I'm dead. Jack's voice turned cold. If you don't, I'll make sure you wish you were. By the time Jack left the locker room, Brooks had agreed to feed him information, quietly, cautiously. Jack didn't trust him, but he didn't need trust. He needed access. As he walked toward the main entrance, he noticed movement down the hall. Mark Collins. The boy was leaning against the wall outside Harris's office, smirking like he'd just been told a joke only he found funny. When his eyes met Jack's, the smirk widened. Morning, Mr. Carter, Mark called, his voice dripping with mock politeness. Jack kept walking, every muscle in his body screaming to end it right there. But Mark wanted a reaction, and Jack wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Not yet. Outside, Tom was waiting in the truck. Well, Jack slid into the passenger seat. We've got a bigger problem than I thought, and we need to move fast. Tom's eyes narrowed. How fast? Jack looked out the window toward the school. Before they make their next move. That night, Brooks texted a location, an old storage building near the edge of town. Harris will be there. The message read. Collins too. Midnight. Jack read it twice, then showed it to Tom. You think it's a trap? Tom asked. Jack's reply was immediate. Doesn't matter. They arrived early, taking positions in the shadows across from the building. The night air was thick, carrying the faint smell of oil and dust. At 11:58, a black SUV pulled up. Harris got out first, glancing nervously around. Collins followed, calm as ever. They disappeared inside. Jack and Tom exchanged a look. Let's go fishing, Jack said. Inside, the building was lit by a single hanging bulb, swinging slightly in the still air. Wooden crates lined the walls, and a folding table sat in the center. Collins and Harris stood on opposite sides, speaking in low tones. Jack and Tom moved closer, staying in the shadows. Can't keep this quiet forever, Harris was saying. We don't need forever, Collins replied. Just long enough to move the last of the shipments. After that, he paused, smiling faintly. There won't be anyone left to ask questions. Jack's fingers tightened around the handle of his knife. He could end it now, Collins, Harris, both of them. But something in him said to wait, to listen. And Carter? Harris asked. Collins's smile widened. He won't see it coming. Tom leaned in close, whispering, We've got enough to burn them. Jack shook his head slightly. Not yet. I want every name, every place, every dollar. But before they could move, a loud metallic click echoed from behind them. They turned to see two armed men blocking the exit, guns raised. Collins didn't even look surprised. Mr. Carter, he said, his voice calm and cold. So nice of you to join us. The barrels of the pistols gleamed under the swinging bulb, catching the light like small, deadly mirrors. Jack Carter's gaze didn't waver. He'd stared down muzzles like this before, on dusty roads halfway across the world, in villages where the wrong glance got you shot. The difference here? This was his hometown. These weren't insurgents. These were neighbors. Collins stepped forward, hands casually behind his back, his expensive shoes clicking against the concrete. You've been very busy, Carter, he said, his tone the measured arrogance of a man who believed he already owned the outcome. Digging where you shouldn't. Poking at things you don't understand. Jack didn't move. I understand just fine. Collins smiled faintly. Do you? Then you understand you're not walking out of here unless I allow it. Tom shifted slightly, his stance ready, but Jack gave a subtle shake of his head. Not yet. Collins nodded to one of the gunmen. Take him. The man moved forward, weapon raised. Jack let him get close enough to smell the faint trace of cigarette smoke on his jacket, before his hand shot up, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting. The gun clattered to the floor. In the same motion, Jack drove his elbow into the man's jaw, sending him sprawling. The second guard reacted instantly, but Tom stepped into his path, catching the man's forearm and slamming it into the nearby crate. The gun fired once, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, but the shot went wide. Jack scooped up the fallen pistol and leveled it at Collins. Sit down. For the first time, Collins's eyes narrowed. Harris was frozen in place, his face pale. Jack turned his aim slightly toward him. You too. Collins chuckled softly, as if amused by the inconvenience. You think this changes anything? Men like me, we don't lose. Jack stepped closer, the pistol steady in his hand. Everyone loses. The trick is making sure it hurts enough when it happens. He motioned for Harris to move toward the table. Sit. Harris obeyed quickly, his eyes darting between Jack and Collins like a rabbit trapped between two wolves. Jack's voice was low, measured. You're going to tell me everything, Harris. Every shipment. Every payment. Every kid you've targeted. Harris's hands trembled. I can't. You can, Jack said, pressing the barrel to the table, inches from Harris's fingers. And you will. Collins leaned back slightly, still calm. If he talks, he dies. And so do you, Carter. The difference is, your death will be quick. His won't. Jack's eyes locked on Harris. You believe him, Harris? You think he'll protect you? Because I promise you, the second you're no longer useful to him, you'll end up in a shallow grave. Harris swallowed hard. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Collins runs it all, Harris blurted finally, his voice shaking. The shipping company's a front. Drugs, cash, sometimes kids. We hide it in regular freight. The school's just one of the ways we find the right ones. Jack's jaw tightened. And Lily. Harris glanced at Collins, then back at Jack. Mark was supposed to scare her. Not hurt her like that. But when she fought back, it got out of hand. Collins ordered it covered up. Brooks made sure the report went nowhere. Jack leaned in close to Harris, his voice like ice. Where's the rest of the evidence? In the station, Harris stammered. Locked evidence room. Only Brooks has the key. Jack straightened, looking at Collins. You're done. Collins's smirk returned. You think this is enough to bring me down? Even if you walk out of here alive, Carter, the people I own will make sure you never get near that evidence. Jack's tone didn't change. Then I guess I'll just have to take it from him directly. From the corner of his eye, Jack caught movement. The first guard was getting back up. In one smooth motion, Jack swung the pistol, cracking the man across the temple. He dropped again, unconscious. Tom stepped in closer, covering Jack's flank. We've got what we need. Time to move. Jack nodded, but before turning to leave, he looked at Collins one last time. I'm not just going to end this, Richard. I'm going to make sure you feel every second of it. Collins's voice followed them out. I'll be seeing you soon, Carter. And next time, I'll be the one holding the gun. Outside, the night air hit them like a bucket of ice water. They moved fast, keeping to the shadows until they reached Tom's truck. Once inside, Tom started the engine. You trust Harris? Jack shook his head. No, but I believe he's scared enough to be telling the truth. Tom's brow furrowed. Which means Brooks is the next target. Jack's voice was a low growl. He was always the next target. 2 hours later, Jack sat alone in his garage, the war board in front of him. A new thread now connected Harris's name to Brooks, then to the station, then straight to Richard Collins. He stared at Brooks's name for a long time, the memory of those photos in the locker burning in his mind. Tomorrow, the hunt would turn toward the man with the badge. But Jack wasn't going to arrest him. He was going to break him. The morning after Harris spilled everything, Jack Carter sat in his truck across the street from the police station. The sun had barely crested over the rooftops, but Ryan Brooks was already inside, his cruiser parked in its usual spot. Jack watched the front doors for a long time, the steady stream of officers coming and going, each one unknowingly walking through a nest of rot. He could picture the evidence room in his mind. Harris's description had been clear enough. A steel door in the back corner, keypad lock, reinforced hinges. Inside, the photographs, files, and maybe more. Brooks had the only key, but breaking in wasn't the hard part. The hard part was making Brooks give it to him. Jack didn't move on him immediately. He'd learned long ago, fear worked best when it had time to bloom. So he started small. The first message came as Brooks sat at his desk, coffee steaming in front of him. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I know what you keep in locker 19. Brooks froze, his eyes darting to the hallway where the staff lockers were. Slowly, he stood, coffee forgotten, and walked out. When he opened locker 19, it was empty, except for an envelope. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of Brooks taken just last night, standing in the storage building with Richard Collins. Jack was nowhere near the station when Brooks found the photo. He was sitting in a diner 3 blocks away, nursing a black coffee and watching from a booth near the window. He saw Brooks leave the station, his pace quick, almost panicked. He lit a cigarette before he'd even reached his car, glancing over his shoulder like he could feel eyes on him. Jack smiled faintly. The seed was planted. Later that day, Brooks found a second envelope, this one taped to his apartment door. Inside was another photograph. His wife and son. The picture wasn't threatening on its own, just them walking out of a grocery store, laughing. But Brooks understood the implication immediately. That night, he didn't sleep. By the third day, Brooks was fraying. His usual swagger at the station was gone, replaced with a twitchy, defensive edge. He jumped at sudden noises. His eyes moved constantly, scanning the room. Jack let it build until the evening, then made his move. Brooks left the station just after sunset, taking his usual route home. Jack followed at a distance, headlights off, letting the shadows do the work. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that turned every sound into a whisper of warning. When Brooks pulled into his driveway and stepped out of the cruiser, Jack was already there, emerging from the side of the house like a ghost. Brooks flinched hard. Jesus Christ, Carter. Jack was on him before he could finish, slamming him back against the side of the car. Keys. To the evidence room. Brooks shook his head, panic in his eyes. "I can't." Jack pressed the muzzle of his pistol into Brooks's ribs. "You can. And you will." Inside the house, Brooks stumbled toward a small safe in the bedroom closet. His hands shook as he spun the dial. "You think Collins won't kill me for this?" he asked, his voice cracking. Jack's reply was cold. "You think I won't?" The safe door swung open. Inside was a ring of keys. Brooks pulled one free, the evidence room key, and handed it over. Jack took it, slipping it into his pocket. "You'll go to work tomorrow like nothing happened. You'll keep your head down. And if you even think about warning Collins, I'll know." Brooks swallowed hard. "What are you going to do with it?" Jack stepped back toward the door. "Burn him to the ground." At 2 a.m., Jack was inside the station. He moved like a shadow, every step calculated. The evidence room door loomed ahead, the keypad glowing faintly in the dark. The key slid in smoothly, and with a quiet click, the lock disengaged. Inside, the air was cool and stale, the shelves lined with boxes, folders, and plastic evidence bags. Jack's flashlight swept across the rows until it found what he was looking for, an unmarked box shoved toward the back. He pulled it down and opened it. Inside were the photographs Harris had described, and more. Files with names, addresses, and coded notes. Some marked with red X's, others with dates. And in the center, a single envelope with his daughter's name. Jack's hands tightened around it as he opened it. Inside was a thin file, a timeline. Notes about her routine, who she talked to, where she went after school. It read like the kind of surveillance report he'd written during reconnaissance missions. Someone had been tracking her for months. At the bottom of the page, in bold marker, was a single word, remove. Jack stood in the dark room, the weight of the file heavy in his hands. This wasn't random cruelty. This wasn't even just Collins's ego. Lily had been marked for elimination. The sound of a door creaking echoed through the station. Jack's head snapped toward it, hand going to his pistol. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Coming closer. The beam of his flashlight caught the figure as it stepped into the evidence room. Mark Collins. The boy smirked when he saw Jack. My dad said you'd come here. Jack didn't move. And he sent you? Mark's smirk widened. He sent me to give you a message. He held up a small folded piece of paper and tossed it onto the floor. Jack didn't take his eyes off him as he stepped forward and kicked it closer. In big block letters, written in red ink, were the words, 1 week. Then she's gone. Mark backed toward the door, his tone mocking. See you soon, Mr. Carter. Jack's fingers twitched on the grip of his pistol. Every muscle screamed to pull the trigger. But he didn't. Not yet. Because now he knew exactly how much time he had. And that meant Collins had just made his biggest mistake. 1 week. The words had burned into Jack Carter's mind the entire night, replaying in the dark like a countdown timer. In his years overseas, he'd learned that when an enemy set a deadline, it meant two things. They were overconfident, and they thought you'd spend that time panicking. Jack didn't panic. He prepared. By dawn, the war board in his garage was filled with new lines. Arrows from Richard Collins to every name he controlled, circles around key locations, red underlines marking the people most likely to carry out the threat. At the center, in bold, underlined twice. Lily. 6 days left. Tom Walker arrived mid-morning, holding a bag of stale diner coffee. He set it on the hood of Jack's truck and took one look at the board. They're not going to wait until the 7th day, Tom said. Jack nodded. I know. That's why we're hitting first. Tom frowned. We? Jack glanced at him. You still in this? Tom gave a humorless smile. Hell yes. The plan started with Harris. Jack knew the principal had been on edge since the warehouse meeting. If anyone would fold under pressure, it was him. And when he folded, he'd lead Jack straight to the next link in the chain. That afternoon, Jack followed Harris from the school to a small insurance office downtown. Harris went inside, stayed 20 minutes, then left carrying a manila folder. Jack shadowed him until Harris reached a park on the far side of town. He sat on a bench near the pond, scanning the area nervously. Moments later, a man in a dark coat approached. Jack recognized him instantly, Collins's courier. The exchange was quick. The folder for a thick envelope. No words. Just business. As soon as the courier left, Jack moved in. He sat down on the bench beside Harris like they were old friends. Harris nearly jumped out of his skin. Jesus, Jack cut him off. You're going to give me the address. Harris shook his head. I don't. Jack leaned in. You're done lying. You want out of this alive? You'll tell me where they're keeping her. Harris's eyes darted. She's not taken yet. Jack's voice was ice. Yet. Harris swallowed. They've got a safe house. They use it when they move people. East End, near the rail yard. If Collins gives the word, that's where she'll go. 2 hours later, Jack and Tom were parked in an abandoned lot across from the rail yard. The safe house was a 2-story brick building with boarded-up windows and a chain-link fence around the perimeter. Tom scanned the scene through binoculars. 2 guards outside. Probably more inside. No cameras I can see. Jack studied the entrance. They won't move her in through the front. They'll use the alley loading dock. Tom lowered the binoculars. So we block the dock. Jack shook his head. No. We let them bring her here. Then we take all of them at once. For the next 2 days, they prepared the ground. Tom rigged the alley with a remote-triggered barricade, an old delivery truck that could be rolled into place in seconds. Jack scouted every approach, memorizing guard rotations. On the 3rd night, they waited. The rail yard was silent except for the faint hum of distant freight engines. At 11:42 p.m., headlights appeared down the street. A black SUV. Jack's chest tightened when he saw the figure in the back seat. Lily. She was conscious, but her head was down, hands bound. Tom's hand hovered over the barricade trigger. Call it. Jack's voice was steady. Wait until they're inside the dock. The SUV pulled into the alley, slowed, and rolled toward the rear entrance. 2 guards stepped out first, scanning the area. Jack and Tom stayed hidden, counting the seconds. When the last man had stepped inside, Jack said, "Now." Tom hit the trigger. The delivery truck roared to life, rolling into place and slamming against the dock gate. The only exit was sealed. Jack moved first, slipping through the side entrance while Tom covered the alley. Inside, the air stank of mildew and sweat. Jack could hear muffled voices upstairs. He moved quietly, pistol raised, climbing the creaking wooden staircase. At the top, he found a hallway with 3 doors. One stood slightly ajar, lights spilling into the hall. He pushed it open. Lily sat on a chair, her hands zip-tied, eyes widening when she saw him. "Dad." Jack was at her side in 2 steps, cutting her bonds. "We're going home." The moment they stepped into the hallway, shouting erupted from downstairs. The trap had been sprung, but now they had to fight their way out. Jack shoved Lily behind him, moving fast. 2 men charged up the stairs, guns drawn. Jack fired twice, both shots clean, dropping them before they could aim. "Stay behind me," he told Lily, pushing toward the side door. They burst into the alley where Tom was already in position, rifle raised. "Let's move." But before they could take 3 steps, another SUV screeched to a halt at the far end of the alley. The driver's door opened, and Richard Collins stepped out. "Carter," he called, his voice carrying even over the idling engine. "You think this ends tonight?" Jack didn't answer. He shoved Lily toward Tom. "Get her out." Tom hesitated. "Jack, go." As Tom and Lily disappeared into the shadows, Jack turned back to Collins. For a moment, the 2 men just stared at each other, the father and the predator. Then Collins smiled faintly. "You've got guts. I'll give you that. But you've also just signed your death warrant." Jack raised his pistol. "So have you." From the corner of his eye, Jack caught movement. 3 more men stepping from the SUV, rifles in hand. He knew he couldn't take them all. Not here, not now. But he also knew something Collins didn't. Jack had just planted enough listening devices in the safe house to hear every word Collins spoke from now on. Jack stepped back toward the shadows, his voice low but clear. "Enjoy the next few days, Richard. They're the last ones you'll have." Collins's smile didn't fade. "We'll see." As Jack disappeared into the night, his earpiece crackled. Tom's voice came through. "She's safe. For now." Jack's eyes stayed on the glow of the SUV's taillights, fading into the distance. "For now," he repeated. The trap had snapped shut, but the biggest predator was still walking free. 2 days after pulling Lily from the safe house, the air around Jack Carter felt heavier. The kind of heaviness that told him the enemy was adapting. Collins hadn't come after him directly. Not yet. That meant the man was recalibrating, reassigning pieces on his board. And in Jack's experience, when a predator got quiet, it was because they'd chosen a different angle of attack. Jack was in his garage, reviewing audio from the listening devices he'd planted in the safe house, when a voice cut through the static. "Ryan Brooks. He's got her back. Carter pulled her right from under us." A pause. Then Richard Collins's voice, cool and controlled. "Then we changed the play. Bring me Brooks." Jack froze the audio, his jaw tightening. Collins wasn't just giving orders. He was shifting the weight. If he was calling Brooks in, it meant one thing. Brooks was about to be tested. And men like Brooks, when cornered, had a habit of flipping. Jack knew he needed to get to him first. That night, Jack sat in the shadows outside Brooks's apartment complex, the low hum of passing traffic covering his presence. The hours ticked by. At 10:43 p.m., a black SUV pulled into the lot. Brooks stepped out, flanked by 2 of Collins's men. They weren't here to talk. Jack was moving before his mind even caught up. The confrontation happened in the hallway outside Brooks's door. Jack slipped in through the side entrance of the building, cutting across until he was behind them. The first man reached for his waistband. Jack's arm snaked around his neck from behind, yanking him backward and slamming him into the wall. The second man spun, gun half raised, too slow. Jack's shoulder crashed into his midsection, sending the weapon clattering to the floor. Brooks just stood there, eyes wide, as Jack dispatched both men with quick, surgical precision. When it was over, Jack stood in front of him. Inside. Now. The apartment was small, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of stale beer. Jack locked the door behind them. "They sent you a message tonight," Jack said, pacing slowly. "You know what it means." Brooks sat heavily on the couch, rubbing his face. "I don't have to guess. Collins doesn't trust me anymore." Jack stopped pacing. "Then you know what comes next." Brooks's eyes flicked to him. "You want me to help you?" "I want you to survive," Jack said. "Helping me is just the side effect." Brooks let out a humorless laugh. "You've got no idea what Collins does to people who cross him." Jack leaned in. "You've got no idea what I do to people who hurt my family." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Brooks exhaled slowly. "If I talk, I'm dead." "You're already dead," Jack said. "Only question is whether you take him with you." Finally, Brooks nodded. "There's something you don't know. The safe house wasn't the endgame. It was just the holding point. Collins has another property, a farmhouse, way out near the county line. That's where the real business happens." Jack's eyes narrowed. "And that's where he would have taken her." Brooks nodded. "If you hadn't gotten to her, yeah." Jack studied him. "You're taking me there." Brooks hesitated. "You're asking me to walk into a death trap." Jack's voice was calm. "No, I'm telling you." They left before dawn, Brooks driving his unmarked cruiser down narrow country roads that seemed to go on forever. The horizon glowed faintly with the first hints of sunrise, painting the fields in dull gold. "This is it," Brooks said finally, pulling off onto a gravel drive. The farmhouse sat at the end of a long lane, half hidden by overgrown trees. From a distance, it looked abandoned. But Jack could see the signs. A glint of sunlight on a rifle barrel in the upstairs window, faint tire tracks leading to a concealed garage. They parked behind a line of old farm equipment, far enough to stay out of sight. Jack scanned the property. "How many inside?" "6, maybe 7, Brooks said. "Collins doesn't come here often, but when he does, it's for special cases." Jack didn't ask what special cases meant. He already knew. The plan was simple. Brooks would go in first, pretend he was there to check in. Jack would follow through the rear once Brooks had the guard's attention. It worked at first. Brooks entered without hesitation, chatting casually with the man at the door. Jack slipped in through the back, moving down a narrow hallway lined with closed doors. Then he heard it. Brooks's voice. Only now it was different. Louder. Directed toward the back. "He's here. Carter's here." Jack's body reacted before his mind had time to curse. He dove into the nearest room as gunfire erupted in the hall, splinters flying from the doorframe. Betrayal burned hotter than the adrenaline. Brooks hadn't flipped, he'd played him. Jack slid across the floor, flipping the small table for cover as 2 armed men stormed the room. He took the first down with a shot to the leg, the second with a blow from the butt of his pistol. Through the chaos, he caught sight of Brooks at the far end of the hall, retreating toward the front door with one of Collins's lieutenants. Jack fired twice, both rounds shattering the doorframe inches from Brooks's head. The man flinched, but didn't stop. By the time Jack reached the front porch, the cruiser was already tearing down the gravel drive, dust billowing behind it. Tom's voice came through Jack's earpiece. Tense. "What happened?" "Brooks sold us out," Jack said, eyes fixed on the disappearing taillights. "He's heading straight to Collins." Tom didn't hesitate. "Then we take him before he gets there." Jack's voice was low, lethal. "No, we let him lead us right to him." As the farmhouse burned behind him, Jack had set the fire on his way out. He climbed into Tom's truck. "Collins is going to think he's won," Jack said. "Let him." Tom glanced at him. "You're planning something." Jack's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I'm planning everything." The next 24 hours were spent in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because every word now carried weight. Jack Carter and Tom Walker knew that the window was closing. Brooks's betrayal meant Collins was expecting a strike, and that meant the man would either fortify or vanish. Jack had no intention of letting him do either. They tracked Brooks first, not through brute force, through patience. Tom tapped into traffic cams and local surveillance grids, watching for the unmarked cruiser. By noon the next day, they had him. Brooks had been spotted at the Collins estate, walking into the main house with a large folder under his arm. No hesitation, No fear. He's handing over everything, Tom said, watching the grainy feed. Your name, your moves, probably the fact that Lily's not in town anymore. Jack's jaw tightened. Good. The more they think they know, the better this will work. That night, they parked in a wooded ridge overlooking the estate. The sprawling mansion was lit like a beacon, its long driveway crawling with security. 2 SUVs at the front, a guardhouse at the gate, more men posted along the perimeter. Looks like a fortress, Tom muttered. Jack's voice was steady. Fortresses have blind spots. You just have to know where to look. They watch for hours. Guard rotations. Camera sweeps. Delivery schedules. By 2 a.m., Jack had it. There, he said, pointing to the east side of the property. Service entrance. Only one guard, and the camera's angled wrong. That's how we get in. They moved at dawn. Jack wore dark fatigues, a small pack strapped across his shoulders. Inside were the tools for a surgical strike, suppressed pistol, combat knife, rope, and a single .45 round in a small black case. Tom eyed the case as they geared up. That the one? Jack nodded. Last bullet. It's got a name on it. They approached through the tree line, timing each step with the shift change. The lone guard at the service entrance never saw them coming. Jack's hand closed over his mouth, the knife flashing once, and the man was lowered silently to the ground. Inside, the mansion was a labyrinth of polished hallways and expensive art. Jack moved like a shadow, every step deliberate. Tom kept watch at the junctions, signaling clear with quick hand motions. They reached the study without encountering another guard. Jack eased the door open. Richard Collins sat behind a massive oak desk, a glass of whiskey in one hand, the morning paper in the other. And beside him, Ryan Brooks. Collins didn't look surprised. Mr. Carter, I was wondering when you'd show. Brooks stood slowly, eyes flicking between Jack and Tom. He knows everything. You don't have to. Jack cut him off. Shut up. Collins swirled his whiskey lazily. You think killing me changes anything? Men like me don't die in mansions. We die of old age, surrounded by people who still call us sir. Jack stepped forward, the suppressed pistol in his hand. Then let's see how it feels to be the exception. Brooks took a step toward him, palms up. Jack, listen. Jack's gun swung toward him. You had your chance. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Then Brooks said something Jack didn't expect. I can get you everyone. Not just him. His partners. His bankers. The ones who'll take over when he's gone. Collins chuckled. He's lying. He's been lying since the day you met him. Jack stared at Brooks, weighing the words. This was the choice. End Collins now and cut off the head, or gamble on Brooks to burn the whole network. Tom shifted uneasily. Jack. Jack lowered the pistol slightly. Where? Brooks's shoulders eased. There's a storage unit on the west side. Keys are in his desk. Everything's there. Collins's voice was ice. You pull that trigger, Carter, and you'll never make it off this property alive. Jack stepped to the desk, opened the top drawer, and saw it. Not keys. A small remote, its red button flashing faintly. His eyes snapped to Collins. What's this? Collins's smile was slow. Insurance. Press it, and every file you want goes up in flames. Brooks swore under his breath. He's bluffing. Collins raised his glass in a mocking toast. Try me. Jack holstered the pistol, pulled the small black case from his pack, and opened it. The single .45 round gleamed under the study's soft light. Collins frowned slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Jack loaded it into the pistol, chambered the round. It means I don't miss. The next few seconds happened in a blur. Collins's hand twitched toward the remote. Jack's shot cracked through the air, the suppressed sound still sharp in the confined room. The glass in Collins's hand shattered, whiskey spraying across the desk. The remote spun from his grip, clattering to the floor. Collins stared at him, shock in his eyes, but the round hadn't hit his chest. It had buried itself an inch deep in the wood of the desk, right beside his hand. Jack stepped forward, kicking the remote away. That bullet has your name on it, Richard. I'm saving it for the moment you understand why. Tom grabbed the remote, checking it over. It's real. would have lit up the whole storage site. Brooks's face was pale. You should have just killed him. Jack's gaze stayed on Collins. Oh, I will. But first, he's going to watch everything he built burn. They left the mansion through the same service entrance, the sound of distant shouting following them into the tree line. Tom glanced over his shoulder. You think he'll just sit back after this? Jack shook his head. No, he's coming. And that's exactly what I want. That night, Jack spread out a new map in the garage. At the center was the storage site Brooks had mentioned. Around it were escape routes, choke points, and ambush positions. He placed the black case in the middle of the map, the single spent bullet still warm in his mind. One more move, he said quietly. Then it ends. The storage site sat on the edge of an industrial park, a row of rusting corrugated metal units under a flickering street lamp. The air smelled faintly of oil and rain, and the silence had the kind of weight that told Jack Carter this night was going to end with blood. Tom Walker crouched beside him in the shadows of an abandoned loading dock, scanning the area with binoculars. 2 guards at the front, one in a truck making loops every 5 minutes. Cameras on the corners, but they're old, easy to blind. Jack's eyes never left the row of units. We don't need quiet, he said. We need final. They moved in low, cutting across the cracked asphalt toward the east fence. Jack clipped the chain with a quiet snap and slipped through, Tom right behind. The looping truck passed by on schedule, its headlights sweeping harmlessly across the far wall. Jack reached the door to Unit 19, Brooks's key fitting perfectly into the lock. The door groaned as it rolled upward. Inside was everything Harris and Brooks had hinted at, and worse. Stacks of banker boxes, each marked with numbers, dates, and code words. Ledgers detailing payouts to city officials. Photographs of victims, some crossed out in red ink. Flash drives in neat rows, each labeled with a year. Tom's voice was tight. This is it. Everything. We could bury them all. Jack's gaze swept the room, calculating. We're not burying it, he said finally. We're making it impossible to hide. He started loading the boxes into a canvas bag while Tom set up a small portable transmitter, something they'd used overseas to hijack local frequencies. Within minutes, every police radio, every TV tuned to the local station, every open cell signal in a 10-mile radius would receive the same broadcast, scanned copies of Collins's files, flashing across the screen in real time. Once it starts, there's no pulling it back, Tom said. Jack zipped the bag. That's the point. The transmitter's light went green. Somewhere in town, a dispatcher's voice would be replaced by a ledger page showing a payoff from Collins to Ryan Brooks. Somewhere else, a living room TV would flicker to a photo of Harris meeting with a courier. It was already too late for Collins to stop it. But Collins didn't come here to stop it. He came here to kill. The screech of tires ripped through the night. 2 SUVs barreled into the lot, headlights blinding in the dark. Doors slammed. Boots hit asphalt. Tom killed the transmitter's lamp and drew his rifle. Company. Jack stepped to the doorway, pistol in hand. It's him. Richard Collins emerged from the lead SUV like a man stepping onto his own stage. He wore a long coat, his eyes cold, unhurried. Behind him, 6 men fanned out in a semicircle, rifles up. You've been busy, Carter, Collins called. Broadcasting lies won't save you. The people I own will never let this stick. Jack stepped into the open, the night wind tugging at his jacket. Then you should have killed me when you had the chance. Collins smirked. I'm correcting that mistake now. The first shot cracked through the air, sparking against the unit's doorframe. Jack dove left, Tom returning fire, the lot erupting into chaos. Bullets shattered concrete, sparks lighting the darkness. Jack moved low, flanking right, taking down 2 of Collins's men before they even knew he'd moved. Tom's rifle barked steady cover, dropping another who broke for the SUVs. Collins advanced through the noise, eyes locked on Jack. You can't win, he shouted over the gunfire. You kill me, someone else takes my place. Jack's voice was steel. Then I'll keep going until there's no one left to take it. They closed the distance fast, gunfire giving way to fists. Jack slammed Collins against the side of the SUV, the man's coat twisting in his grip. Collins fought hard, a knee driving toward Jack's ribs, but Jack caught it and drove him backward onto the hood. The pistol came free in Jack's hand, the same one that had fired the desk shot days ago. He drew the small black case from his pocket, clicking it open with his thumb. The last .45 round gleamed under the harsh glare of the SUV's headlights. "This one," Jack said, sliding it into the chamber, "has been waiting for you." Collins laughed breathlessly, blood on his teeth. "Pull it, Carter. Make yourself the monster they think you are." Jack's arm steadied. "No, Richard. Monsters hide in the dark. I'm the one who drags them into the light." The gun went off, loud, final. Collins jerked once, then went still, his body sliding off the hood onto the wet pavement. Silence followed. No more gunfire. No more movement. Just the hiss of cooling engines and the slow, steady sound of Jack's breathing. Tom stepped out from behind the SUV, rifle lowered. "It's over." Jack shook his head. "No, it's just done." By sunrise, the files had spread beyond the county, beyond the state. National networks were running the images. The FBI was already en route. Ryan Brooks was in custody. David Harris had disappeared. The Collins estate was swarming with agents. Lily came home that afternoon. Jack didn't tell her everything. Some things you didn't put on a child's shoulders. But when she hugged him, she held on longer than usual, and that was enough. That night, Jack stood alone in his garage, staring at the empty black case on his workbench. The last bullet was gone, but its purpose had been served. Tom's voice came from the doorway. "So, Justice." Jack didn't look away from the case. "Justice? Damnation. Depends on who's telling the story." Tom nodded once. "And you?" Jack finally turned, his eyes steady. "I'm done telling it. The rest is theirs." As the garage door rattled shut, the quiet returned. Outside, the wind carried away the last echoes of Richard Collins's empire. And somewhere in the dark, a father finally breathed without rage in his lungs. If this story gripped you from the first moment to the last, hit that like button so we know you want more hard-hitting revenge tales. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story might just be darker, deeper, and more shocking than this one. And in the comments, tell us, if you were in Jack Carter's shoes, would you stop at justice or go all the way to damnation?